Picture this, the biggest tech giant on the planet, just shattering into pieces. The iconic logo cracking, the doors locking, screens going permanently dark. Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into one of the most stunning, dramatic, and frankly terrifying moments in modern business history, Apple's 90-day countdown to bankruptcy. And look, this isn't some exaggeration. It's not a metaphor. We're going to break down the exact sequence of events, the absolutely desperate measures, and the unbelievable twists that happened when an absolute empire was standing right on the edge of a cliff.
Did you know Apple almost disappeared forever? Let that really sink in for a second. I want you to imagine a world right now where you don't have that smartphone in your pocket. A world without the tablets we use to read, the computers we use for work, or those wireless earbuds that basically soundtrack our daily lives. Imagine a reality where the company that literally redefined modern human communication just collapsed, totally swept into the dustbin of history. It sounds impossible today, right? Because they're absolutely everywhere. But that unimaginable scenario, it was almost our absolute reality.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Part 1, 90 days from bankruptcy.
We've got to transport ourselves back to 1997. The offices were emptying out. The optimism was completely gone. And Apple was, for all intents and purposes, dying. Operating systems like Copland had failed miserably, and the company was suffocating under the weight of some terrible business realities. Just grasp the sheer devastating scale of the problem here. $1 billion. Apple was bleeding cash at an unprecedented rate, losing nearly $1 billion a year. That's a hemorrhage of capital that almost no company can survive. Morale plummets, top talent abandons the empty offices, and the public? They start to smell blood in the water. They were in a complete financial freefall.
And here's the terrifying bottom line: 90 days. This wasn't some long-term problem they had years to figure out. No, they were just weeks away from completely running out of money. Put yourself in the shoes of an Apple executive in 1997. You look at the bank accounts, you look at the expenses, and you realize in exactly 3 months, the lights go out, you can't make payroll, you can't pay suppliers, it is game over. The pressure was unimaginable. They needed a miracle, and they needed it yesterday.
Which brings us to part 2, the return of Steve Jobs. With the company just weeks away from absolute destruction, they made a truly desperate move. Through the acquisition of a company called Next, they brought back their exiled founder, Steve Jobs. It was a total Hail Mary pass. But the ultimate irony here? 12 years. Steve Jobs was returning to save the exact same company that had fired him a dozen years earlier. Think about that. The very board of directors and corporate structure that had deemed him totally unnecessary was now begging him to save them from a crisis they created. He walked back into the building he helped build, now tasked with stopping its imminent demolition.
Now for part 3, cutting 70%.
So what do you actually do when you take over a company that is 90 days from death? Human instinct, and honestly typical corporate strategy, tells you to panic. It tells you to try everything. Launch new products, just throw spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks. But Jobs did the exact opposite. He walked up to a whiteboard filled with Apple's sprawling, super confusing product lineup, and this brilliantly illustrates how he mercilessly eliminated almost 70% of it. He killed off projects, computers, and devices that teams had spent literally years working on. He kept just 30%. In a moment of ultimate panic, he chose drastic, aggressive reduction.
Why on earth would he do that? Because he knew they had to focus on what truly matters. Jobs realized that Apple's problem wasn't a lack of products, it was a total lack of clarity. They were spread way too thin, making too many mediocre things, and bleeding $1 billion a year doing it. His first move was all about stripping away every single distraction. By cutting that 70%, he forced the surviving talent and the remaining capital to focus solely on their core mission, making a few things brilliantly instead of a whole bunch of things poorly.
All right, part 4, the Microsoft lifeline.
Now, clarity and focus take time to actually yield results. And remember, Apple only had 90 days. They still needed an immediate injection of cash just to keep the lights on while this new strategy took hold. So, set the scene. On one side, you have Apple in a profound crisis, completely desperate. On the other side was Microsoft, the dominant, totally untouchable giant of the era. These two were fierce, bitter competitors. By all traditional business logic, Microsoft should have just pulled up a chair, grabbed some popcorn, and watched Apple drown. But instead, they threw down a lifeline that absolutely shocked the business world to its core.
$150 million. Microsoft stepped in and invested a massive $150 million in cash directly into Apple. Now, why does this matter so much? I mean, it wasn't just about the money, though, don't get me wrong, that cash was absolutely critical to surviving that 90-day countdown. But it was really about what the money represented. Having the biggest tech company in the world back you financially restored a crucial wave of confidence in Apple. It signaled to the market, to the suppliers, and to consumers that Apple wasn't going to disappear. The bleeding had officially been stopped.
Which launches us into Part 5, the era of innovation.
With the Microsoft cash stabilizing the bank accounts and that massive 70% product cut freeing up the company's creative energy, the stage was perfectly set. Because they weren't distracted by dozens of failing projects anymore, they could pour all their genius into a rapid succession of absolute game changers. Phase 1, the iMac, completely revolutionizing the home computer. Phase 2, the iPod, changing how the entire world purchased and listened to music. And Phase 3, the iPhone, a device that literally altered human behavior on a global scale. Listen, none of these sequential, world-changing victories happen if they're still bleeding $1 billion a year on distracted, mediocre products. No way.
The transformation is just staggering, from near bankruptcy to one of the most valuable businesses on the face of the earth. We started this explainer looking at empty offices and a company just weeks away from running out of money back in 1997. But through ruthless cutting, a shocking alliance, and a laser focus on innovation, the rising stock charts tell the ultimate comeback story. They didn't just survive the storm, they absolutely soared.
And finally, Part 6, focus changes everything.
The story of Apple's near-death experience isn't just some cool piece of tech trivia you share at a dinner party. It is a masterclass in strategic survival and growth that applies to literally any business, any project, and honestly, any personal goal you might have. Remember this, sometimes success isn't about doing more, it's about focusing on the right things. When things get tough, our natural human impulse is to add, to work longer hours, to launch more features, take on more clients, to just say yes to every single opportunity. But what Apple proved in 1997 is that addition is often the enemy of greatness. True success actually required immense subtraction.
Focus changes everything. That is the core lesson you must take away from this explainer. Doing less actually created the most valuable company on earth. By embracing the discipline to ignore the good opportunities, they freed themselves up to execute on the truly great ones. Focus isn't just about concentration, it's about the courage to eliminate distractions.
So, as we wrap up, I want to leave you with a pretty provocative question. What is the 70% in your life or your business that you need to cut today? What are the distractions bleeding your energy, just like those bloated products were bleeding Apple's cash? If you were 90 days away from failure, what would you mercilessly cross off your whiteboard so you could finally focus on what truly matters? Take a hard look at your own donut chart, make the cuts, and watch how focus changes everything. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.